Welcome to our final session at the London Technology Week Arena. Over the next 40 minutes, Joel Spolsky, CEO of Stack Overflow, is going to be interviewed by Cliff Sarin, Managing Editor Technology from TechTarget. Stack Overflow is one of London Technology Week's headline partners, and we're delighted to welcome Joel here to represent them within the arena. Joel is the co-founder and CEO of Stack Exchange, the largest network of websites for software developers, including Stack Overflow, the preeminent destination site for programmers to find, ask, and answer their questions. Joel is a globally recognized expert on software development and is known by developers around the world for his personal website, Joel on Software. In 2000, he founded his first company, Fog Creek Software, which creates project management tools for software developers, including Trello, which recently spun out into its own company. Previously, Joel worked at Microsoft, where he designed VBA as a member of the Excel team, and at Juno Online Services, where he developed an internet client used by millions. Cliff is going to interview Joel on how Stack Overflow came about and their obsessions with serving the developer community. Over to you, Cliff.
Thank you.
Well, Joel, hi.
Hi, thanks for having me here. Thanks for interviewing me.
Well, we haven't started yet.
Yeah.
Welcome to London. Welcome to this great show.
It's good to be here.
How are you enjoying London?
Good. It's good to be back. I'm actually here quite regularly since we opened an office. I'm here 3 or 4 times a year, and I always enjoy a chance to come to London. One of my second favorite cities.
Well, you certainly brought the good weather with you.
Yeah, and I brought the weather with. That's right. Everybody's been accusing me of bringing good weather. It was raining in New York.
Well, please don't go, because we want the sunshine. Okay, well, my first question is that you've started a number of companies. I believe it's 3.
Yeah.
What was the most exciting memories about the launches of those companies?
I'm trying to remember. I think probably apropos of Stack Overflow, which we're talking about today, there was a moment when the very first time I saw it launch and kind of immediately knew that it was going to be successful and going to be a big hit was when my co-founder, Jeff Atwood, called me up and said, all right, that site's ready, you can try it out. And at the time, I sort of didn't know what to expect, whether it would work at all or whether we would get anybody to go to it. I didn't know if anybody would participate, if we could get any visitors to the site, if we would get answers to questions. And so I thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in the most recent programming problem I've actually faced myself. I'll actually type that in as a question, and then I'll wait and see how long it takes to get an answer. It'll probably be a few days. Check back in a few days, see if I get an answer. And I started typing the question, and there was this feature I didn't even know. I knew that we wanted this feature, but I didn't know Jeff had built it. But we have this feature that looks at the question as you're typing it and looks to see if anybody has already asked a similar question or used similar keywords. So as soon as I typed the title of my question, this little thing popped up and said, is this the same as your question? And it turns out, indeed, somebody had already asked the very same question I was about to ask. So I said, this is cool. This is already working. And I clicked on that. And not only had it been asked, but to my surprise, it had been answered by 4 different people already. And not only had 4 people answered the question, but a bunch of other people had come along and voted on which answers were best. So this great Stack Overflow feature of sorting it out so the best answers on the top. And that had all already happened just in the minutes since the site had opened on a question which happened to be the same as my own question. So I think we had, on the first day, something like 30,000 people visit the site and type something. And that was really incredible. When I saw it, not only did I see it working, but I saw all these aspects that I had only known theoretically would work. I mean, it's almost like you design a jetliner on paper, and you build it once, and you throw it out on the runway, and you tell the test pilot to take off, and you go out there, and you're like, hey, yeah, look, it's taking off. It didn't blow up, and it's landing. And I was really excited. And I told my co-founder and the other 2 developers that we had, I think that very day I said, I'm pretty confident that the thing that you built is going to be used by every programmer everywhere. It's just going to be a standard tool, I can tell.
Now, I bet you can guess what the next question is.
Yeah.
Well, what was the most depressing thing about having 3 companies that you launched?
The most depressing thing, there were a lot of depressing moments, I think. Part of the problem, people don't realize this, but when stuff isn't working, you always think that the working is right around the corner. So it's very helpful to being an entrepreneur to be a perpetual optimist, where you always kind of think, like, well, it's not that this is bad news, it's just that the good news is a little further off. There were a couple of moments that were really particularly bad. There was a moment when, in 2008, when the world economy was crashing and everybody was talking about a depression. I think it was September 2008, and giant investment banks in New York were shutting down, and at Fog Creek, our revenue was down about 25%, and we literally didn't know if the world was going to collapse or not. I mean, at some point I was thinking, is this going to be a Great Depression? Are we going to have to lay everybody off? I was making plans for laying people off. And what I was going to do, I was going to buy a little puppy, bring him into the office, and say, there's some good news and some bad news. The good news is we got a puppy. The bad news is half of you aren't going to be working here anymore. So I had the whole thing planned out. And that was possibly the hardest.
The puppy.
Yeah, we were very lucky, though. Although we had we had 3 months of decreased sales, but I'm trying to think, September, October, November were terrible. December 2008, it all came back, and we never had to lay anybody off.
So you mentioned Fog Creek. That was started in 2000.
Correct.
Why did you launch Fog Creek?
I started Fog Creek because I was living in New York City. It was just like a great city, and I love living there. And I couldn't find a single place to work as a software developer that cared about software developers, or that treated software developers as anything more than glorified typists. So the industries, and this will sound familiar probably to a lot of people in London, the industries in New York were media, advertising, finance, obviously, but also some healthcare, and those kinds of companies, if they hired programmers, treated them almost as technicians, not as sort of creative talent.
Okay, so Stack Overflow started in 2008.
Right.
This was at the time that all the banks were crashing and all of that stuff was happening.
Yeah, it was actually like right before that. Yeah.
Not a good time to launch
but
a company.
It was still actually remarkably successful. I mean, there's always programmers typing away. And so.
But I mean, for me, I mean, I mentioned briefly beforehand, actually, when we were talking earlier. It's a name that brings back horror stories of bad programming practices and programs that crash.
Well, I'm hoping that I will displace that word in your memory eventually. These newfangled programmers with JavaScript or whatever never see a stack in their lives and have never seen a Stack Overflow. I remember like that particular error message. What it reminds me of is the first C programming class that I took, where every single mistake you could make was either null pointer exception or Stack Overflow. And it was sort of like, there's a million things I could have done wrong, and the only information I get is, something 14 steps removed, where it's like, your car's crashed in an interesting way, your program has gone off the rails, everything is blowing up, and really the only thing that you know about this is that there's either a smell of sulfur in the air or blood pouring out from under the door, but something has gone wrong.
Okay then, so can you give me the 15-second elevator pitch? What is Stack Overflow?
Stack Overflow is just the place where every single programmer gets all the answers to their questions. Right now, about 28 million human beings on the planet visit every month, an average of 6 times a month that they'll come there to get an answer to their questions.
That's about 15 seconds, I think.
I think so.
You mentioned earlier that you were sort of typing in and coming up, and the sort of community had already had answers to questions.
Yeah.
What's next for Stack Overflow itself?
We actually think of this as, we used to think of it as sort of 2 separate parts, but now we really think of it as one holistic whole, which is that, so Stack Overflow is the home for the world's developers, and what they're doing there is essentially learning. They're sharing their knowledge by answering questions. They're learning by reading answers to questions. As they learn more and more, they're upgrading their careers, they're upgrading their marketability, they're upgrading their skills. They're sort of leveling up, to use the game terminology. And what we've been working on very hard lately is Stack Overflow Careers, which is sort of an opportunity to get a job through Stack Overflow, use the work that you've done on Stack Overflow to show potential employers that you're a good developer, but also just give employers an opportunity to find developers and to reach them, based on, very targeted knowledge of, here's a developer that knows PHP pretty well, that's located in London, et cetera. So it's really like learn, share, and level up, and it's that leveling up thing that's kind of in the future. We've had Stack Overflow careers for a couple of years now, but that's really our most major area of growth is in, hopefully, I think, one way I like to think of it is that the first stage for Stack Overflow was every time a programmer had a problem, just saving them a few minutes in finding the solution to that problem. So in the era before Stack Overflow, they'd be on Alta Vista or InfoSeek or whatever it was, Excite, doing searches trying to find the answer to their problems. And once they found it, they would find kind of long, rubbishy conversations that went on and on. I also had this problem. Oh, did you try whatever? No, that doesn't work. Oh, here's the solution. No, actually, that's got a security flaw in it. You shouldn't do that. And you would find these things, and you would be at the beginning of your research process. You spend 10 minutes typing in every clue that you got from the internet, and eventually you'd find the answer. And Stack Overflow has switched that, combined with Google. Let's give them half the credit, which is you type your problem into Google, and they do some magic. You land on a Stack Overflow question, and there's the answer right there. It's already sorted to the top. There's not a lot of extraneous conversation. So you save 5 minutes, you save 10 minutes, you save a half an hour, and we do that for every programmer on Earth 6 times a month. So I think of that as being very, very, very widespread, but maybe a little bit shallow, impacting things in that widespread and shallow way. And the future is really doing the same thing with developers' careers. So if I can reach out to every single programmer in the world, and the next time they're switching jobs, just give them a job that's a better match for their personality, for what they're interested in, for what they need to learn, for what they've already learned. Give them a job where their employers actually treat programmers as talent and not as typists, and not as technicians, and upgrade everybody's career so that it's 5% better. But on a massive scale, that's really my next goal.
So I guess it works the other way around as well. A prospective employer could look through Stack Overflow careers and kind of see who's contributing the most and has got the right kind of skill set.
Right.
Is that how it would work?
Well, that's a part of it. The most visible part is you actually say, as an employer, you actually say, oh, I need to find somebody with these very precise skills at this precise location and hire them. And then when you go on Stack Overflow careers, and you can do a CV search, for example, to search through the resumes or the curriculum vitae of programmers that are already on the site. But then once you find them, you can actually see the work that they've done on Stack Overflow, which might be a few questions that they've answered, might even just be one question that they've answered. And then you pass that on as a recruiter, you pass that on to your technical team, and they can look at that and get a very good feel for, this is the kind of person we want to hire, or this is just not even close to the kind of person we want to hire. And that's sort of one side of the equation. The other side of the equation, since there are a lot of programmers out there who still, a lot of people use Stack Overflow passively. They just answer questions on Stack Overflow.
Yes.
They don't, they just read answers on Stack Overflow. They don't answer questions themselves. And even for those programmers, just the fact that they're arriving on certain questions gives us a bunch of information about what programming languages they use, what libraries they use, what technologies they use, how much experience they have, whether they're advanced or beginner or student level or advanced level. And that allows us to create very targeted, essentially advertising campaigns for the employer. So an employer will tell us exactly the class of programmer they want to hire and whether they want to hire them today or later, or they just want to do kind of recruitment branding, essentially, like, hey, this is a great place to work. I bet you didn't realize that this is a wonderful place to work. And they can sort of do that all in a very, very targeted way and reach programmers on Stack Overflow.
You kind of mentioned it before about some of the solutions don't always work.
Yeah.
But have you ever found that there's, I'm sure none of the audience would ever dream of doing this, but actually being disruptive, people doing bad things on there?
Yeah, I think that's going to happen with any community site, any user-generated content site on the internet. And I think we've probably done a better job than anyone, except possibly Wikipedia, at creating the structure that prevents that from happening. And one of the reasons is that we knew going into it that if we're going to have millions and millions of contributors, that we can't possibly police it all ourselves. And that most of the earlier user-generated sites or content sites or online forums and so forth, had worked on a system of you're either a moderator or you're not a moderator. It's like a binary flag that we turn on, and sometimes the moderators are volunteers and sometimes they're paid employees. Our approach was a little bit different. We said all the moderation, the policing, keeping the site working has to be done by the entire community. We have to spread those responsibilities across everybody. So at the lowest level, with very little experience on the site, you can learn to upvote and downvote. And what we do is as you spend time on Stack Overflow, you gain reputation. And as you gain more and more reputation, we unlock moderation capabilities. We're like, all right, you got 1,000 reputation, you must know the site pretty well. And so we give you the ability to do more and more as you gain that reputation. And what that means is that most of the moderation is happening from the entire community. So somebody can write a rubbish answer that's meaningless or that's a security flaw, and almost anybody else can question it. And quite a few people, if they see that wrong answer, at the very least they can downvote it. As they gain more reputation, they might even be able to delete it if it's actively harmful or spam.
I mean, one of the problems that does happen in community is that sometimes the loudest voices get heard, and even if the most smartest solution is a quiet voice that doesn't have the boldness to say, but this actually works.
Yeah, we're actually very, so one of the great things about having questions and answers about programming, as opposed to, sort of one of our competitors is Quora, and it's Q&A about every possible topic, mostly opinionated. What does it feel like to be a millionaire? And then you can write whatever answer you want. I don't even know if that person writing that answer is a millionaire or not. But
my lottery ticket didn't come in yesterday.
Then you can't tell if that's a good answer or not, because all right, whatever, that's what it feels like for you.
Yeah.
On Stack Overflow, it's all verifiably true or false. Somebody will type it in, you will get an answer. It's either right or wrong, and people will come in and upvote that, and it's very, very black and white and clear cut. So you could put in a wrong answer and be very loud about it, but it won't survive for very long. And one of the things that's actually delightful to see, I went in just for kicks and found a COBOL question on the site. Although nobody really programs in COBOL anymore. I know they say that there's lots of COBOL, but it's not really there.
Yeah.
This was a question from a student. And I answered it incorrectly because I don't know COBOL. And it was almost an experiment to try to see if I could get away with this. I'm like, oh, all right, here's an answer. Try this with a parentheses. And the thing that I wrote technically worked, but it wasn't official COBOL style or whatever. A bunch of very angry people said, no, this is completely wrong. This proves that Stack Overflow doesn't work. And in fact, I think I might have either tweeted about this or mentioned it on my blog, or at some point I drew a lot of attention to my answer in COBOL. And so all the people came in and said, Joel answered a question about COBOL. They voted it up. And so I had a rather unusual number of upvotes. And then when people came in pointing out that indeed the way that I was writing was technically correct, but not the best way to do it in COBOL, there was another way, which was insane, because it's an insane programming language. They put that in the comments, and eventually, the number of votes that I had went down. And people used to delight in Stack Overflow in finding authority figures that had made a mistake and voting it down. So there's a
but you were that figure.
So I could go find that question again and see how well I'm doing, but I'm pretty sure I'm probably well into the minus.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. So we're here at Interrupt, and there's a sort of big startup community in the UK.
Yeah.
What do you think that London has to do to become the next Silicon Valley?
I think that's a great idea. Become the next Silicon Valley. No, I think that's actually I think that's a sort of silly conceit that. It's odd to see that coming from London, really, because usually you hear that from places like Birmingham. No, sorry, I'm going to cuss.
No.
You hear that from places that are trying to build an economy somehow, and they're like, hey, why can't we make a tech? That's the future. That would be a great economy to have. And you're just as likely to build Boeing 747s as you are to become Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley. London is already has an economy. It actually has an economy built on many, many industries, built on lots of things that I don't understand, but also banking and advertising and media and fashion. And it's sort of a world capital for a lot of these things. And it's a fantastic place to build a European headquarters, and it's a fantastic place to hire people who speak every possible language. Like if you are trying to decide whether to open 36 offices in 36 European cities or one office in London, the one office in London, you can actually find the people that speak Latvian with a smattering of Polish fairly easily in Hoxton. So it's It's got lots and lots of strengths, and Silicon Valley has lots and lots of strengths, and there's just no reason to try to emulate, another successful model that's working for a different part of the world.
I don't know if you heard the news today, but our Parliament, Westminster, they need to revamp it. It's like falling down. It really is, and they're going to spend $3 billion doing this.
Yeah.
Do you think $3 billion could be better spent making a tech city in London?
It just doesn't strike me as necessary. I'm not like a huge techno-libertarian but I've never actually really seen, when government attempts to have a policy and to try to pick winners and to try to make a particular industry be successful or another industry be successful, it never goes very far. And I'll bet if we follow those $3 billion and watch how they're spent, we'll find, a very, very low return on investment relative to, fairly basic things that you can do, which London has already done to be, a great hospitable place for business.
Okay, so you've talked about there's lots of skills in London. Hiring good software developers is probably one of the hardest things to do for a tech startup.
Absolutely.
What's your top tips? How would you approach that?
Yeah, I've been sort of advocating for really 15 years since I started blogging and since I started Fog Creek Software. I've been attempting to advocate for better treatment of software developers and kind of more sane policies. And essentially, my concept is that software developers in a company are the talent of the company, and they should be treated like talent. They shouldn't be treated like sort of replaceable cogs. And if you do that, you'll find that it's very, very easy to get people to come work for you. There's a few other, like when you just say top tip, I would say, all right, you got to figure out how to work remotely, because not everybody you want is going to work in the place where your office is. And so if you can work with people that live somewhere else and figure out how to do online, if you can make Google Hangouts or GoToMeeting work, figure out how to make the chat rooms work and how to work with people remotely. That's something that we've done actually now in all three of my companies, Fog Creek, Trello, and Stack Overflow, all have majority remote workforces where most people are working from home.
Yeah, I mean, you changed your views on working from home and working in a central.
Yeah.
And there are some technology giants that say you've got to come to this big glass office and work for
Yeah.
us here.
Yeah, and Marissa Mayer got in a lot of trouble for firing all the people that were remote workers at Yahoo. And I think I changed my views. I used to be a very strong believer in we got to get in one place. And I think the reason is that there was kind of a misstep that happened 10 years ago where there was a lot of outsourcing. And it may have been actual outsourcing where you go hire Tata and they build something for you in India, or it could have been more in-house outsourcing where you send somebody off to Bangalore and they open an office there and they hire a bunch of people and you send them work to do overnight while you sleep, and when you wake up in the morning, the work either arrives or it doesn't arrive. And I think that was sort of the first attempt to use remote work. There was a feeling that we would just write a spec and we would send it to some developers somewhere else, and they would work on it very cheaply. We would save a lot of money, and 3 weeks later we would get something back. And when we did that, the quality of work that we got back was not very high, not because they weren't good developers. In some cases they were, in some cases they weren't, but because the supervision wasn't there, the conversation between the customer and the programmer was not high bandwidth because of the big gap in time zones usually, just because we weren't working at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so the biggest thing I discovered about remote work is the way to make it happen is to hire people that are in a similar time zone. So you're working at the same time. And then you can go anywhere. There's no reason not to go. So we pretty much work with people in Western Europe and in North America. And the people in Western Europe pretty much work slightly later hours. The people in North America work earlier hours. We overlap 4 or 5 hours a day. And that gives us the ability to have very, very high bandwidth, intensive back and forth conversations on the team. And there's a sense that you're working together at the same time. You just happen to be intermediated with something like a Google Hangouts GoToMeeting.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess communications is a lot better than it was 10 years ago anyway. So,
yeah.
And we've got things like FaceTime and
yeah. It's actually astonishing. You might people think of online video conferencing as like, oh, I'll have a meeting, so I'll turn the online video conferencing on for the purpose of the meeting. But we'll actually have teams that just leave a Google Hangout running all the time. and then they'll go in there and they might mention something if they want to ask somebody something.
Yeah.
They'll just be socializing in Hangouts for hours and hours and hours, and they'll leave it on ambiently when they're doing their other work. So they might as well be all in an office together in terms of the bandwidth of the communication. So I think the biggest thing that changed is that we figured out that you got to have the whole team working together at the same time, and then it won't matter where they are. If you try to, write a spec, send it off, get an answer in 3 weeks, then the results are very poor.
Okay, I mean, I wanted to ask you about, I guess we all do really. I mean, what do you think will be hot in 6 months' time? What should we be focusing on?
For 6 months' time?
Yeah.
Robots, I think.
Really? Why is that?
No, I don't know. I just made that
He doesn't know. He doesn't know.
I don't. It's very, very hard for me to tell. I've discovered that I'm extraordinarily bad at predicting the future, and in fact, sometimes I'm pretty bad. If you even ask me what happened in the past, I'll tell you, make up some stories. But one option is to go with the New York Times cartoon that appeared yesterday, which was the self-driving cars. So there's a person sitting in a little saucer-shaped self-driving car. It's got a steering wheel, which he's not using. And of course, he's reading the New York Times, the broadsheet format in paper, as the car drives him to work. So we're going to go backwards. We're going to go back to paper newspapers, which I haven't seen in years, and forwards to self-driving cars. I don't even actually, that's kind of a joke. I don't even think self-driving cars are going to happen very soon. 6 months might be a little bit easier. Like I might be able to, let me think. No, I have no idea. Bitcoins? No, it's not Bitcoins.
No, next
Bitcoins
year maybe?
will go to 0 or 1,000.
What about long term in the future?
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, we've got kids growing up, and they're getting into programming, and they've got things like their Raspberry Pi and stuff like that. I mean, in terms of the sort of things that they should be learning, I mean, I'm not saying there's going to be this great programming language that no one's invented yet, and this is what you should be doing. But what sort of things that they should be looking for?
That's actually sort of interesting because I think that there is a bunch of basic skills that will serve you in programming and just in life forever. I mean, one of the things I've said to people that are learning how to program is that there comes a moment where you learn how to take a problem that you're encountering and subdivide it through binary search and get it down to the single line of code that is not doing what you thought it was going to do. And then you can express your problem. When you have any problem, you've learned enough of a debugging technique. So you can express your problem as, I wanted X, I did Y, I expected X, but I got Z instead. And so if you can express your problem in that form of wanted this, expected, you did this, expected this, and got that, then you can go ask that question on Stack Overflow, and this is why I know that this works. And every other programmer in the world will be like, aha, I know exactly what's wrong here. I can teach you what you don't know, what's broken in your brain in order to solve this particular problem.
And at least you got Z, and you didn't get a Stack Overflow error.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a stage before that where you sort of say, oh, it doesn't work, and you take your 40 lines of code, dump it on Stack Overflow, and say, it doesn't work. And then other programmers will treat you with disdain because they will say, you're not even a professional programmer. You're not even at that level where you can solve your own problems. You don't have to know the answer to everything. You do have to know that one single problem-solving technique of the divide and conquer, binary search for your problem. Cut your code in half, see whether it's the top half or the bottom half that doesn't work, repeat until you get down to one line of code, and then just sit there and try to formulate it as what were you thinking that this would do, and why didn't it do that? And if you can get to that point, you can solve every problem. And that's sort of the magical skill, I think, that programmers usually learn, I would say probably in their first year out of school.
Well, I do have a couple of other questions, but I'd like to open it up to the audience. So is there any questions for Joel?
Yes.
I'll try and shout. It's quite
Yeah.
There's a microphone coming around.
I won't shout. I won't shout now. I've got one of these anyway. That was fascinating. Thanks, Joel. That was great. In terms of the career side of Stack Overflow, I work for an NGO, so coding and development is a really interesting area where, in terms of the developing countries. Right. Where do you think Stack Overflow careers will go in the developing world next, rather than in the sort of Western Europe and Americas that it is at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, we tend to, it's hard because we tend to focus on the places that hire the most programmers. So, we start with Silicon Valley and New York and Boston and London and so forth. And, we'll sort of dip into emerging economies like France. But, sorry. Very, very offensive, actually. I discovered that you're allowed to, who are you allowed? You're allowed to insult people for being young or for being Dutch, but nothing else really. Sorry. I think sort of two of the greatest strengths in developing economies are going to come from remote work if they can sort of provide remote work. And I think you'll definitely see very good developers in developing economies. And rather than saying, like, how can I get a software factory in wherever it might be, Nigeria, or to pick two developing economies that are very successful, I would say I'm not going to name names, but it's far more likely that a company that does remote work very successfully will be able to hire somebody in another part of the world remotely, as long as the bandwidth is there and the education is there. So, I mean, one of our best developers lives in Brazil. It's maybe 1 or 2 time zones off from North America, so it's very convenient for us in terms of she's working the same time as we're working. We actually decided at some point to pay a single worldwide salary, so we don't give her the 25% that would be a typical Brazilian salary. We just give her the same North American/European salary we pay everybody else, because we thought it would be awkward to have different people on the team getting paid differently. And it doesn't bother us that she's the richest person on her block in Rio de Janeiro. So I think there is sort of an opportunity. And one of the things that means is that might stem brain drain. So you could have places like the Gaza Strip in the West Bank, for example, where you can be a remote developer and you don't have to leave. Other places where instead of sort of all the smart people, like for example, Nigeria has always had this problem of doing very, very good training for a very small number of technocrats, so to speak, programmers and people that are trained as doctors or whatever, and then they literally all leave. So rather than thinking about it in terms of how can we get the companies to relocate or open outsourcing development centers in Burundi or whatever it might be, think about it in terms of how can we make sure that there's enough bandwidth and that the education is decent and that just a basic infrastructure of banking and payments are in place, so that the people that are skilled can either go back home, let's say they learn their skills at MIT, and then they can go back to Nigeria and continue to work for Verizon at a high salary.
Hi, I work for London Partners in New York, based in New York. So hi.
Good.
We work with you guys here. You must collect a lot of data on trends, on programming skills, where they're being learnt, where the strengths are in the world. I mean, I heard that data mining, machine learning, we're really strong in London, for example, because of the people from the banks and stuff. So I'm wondering, you must have some amazing kind of stats or some amazing trends that you see with what languages are being learnt where in the world, and maybe some surprises as well. I'd like to know.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if the material is too surprising, but we do we sort of have 2 sources of data. One is we do a survey of our developers, and I think we got something like 26,000 responses this year when we did that survey. So if you search online for the Stack Overflow survey, you'll find tons and tons of that kind of data. That's a little bit more like, this is what developers tell us. We also have data that we consider to be more robust, of just like what are the most popular questions on Stack Overflow, what are the most popular technologies on Stack Overflow, just based on their usage on the site. We have about something like 28 million people visiting Stack Overflow every month. That's very hard for me to accommodate, because when I started Stack Overflow, I visited the Microsoft Developer Evangelism Group, and I said, hey, you guys work with developers. Do you have any idea how many developers there are in the world? Because we're wondering, at the time, I think we had 6 million monthlies. And I thought, well, 6 million monthlies, I want to know if we're getting to the end of that number. And they said, we estimate 9 million programmers in the world. And I said, great, we have 2/3 of the 9 million developers in the world, and we started with 6 million. Then we hit 9 million. I'm like, great, we have 100% of the developers in the world. Then when we hit 18 million, I had to say, we have 200% of the world's software developers visiting our site every month. And now we're way above that number. So we have 28 million of the world's 9 million developers. The real answer is that the 9 million numbers come from official government demographics of like who calls himself a programmer, and the people that are really programming are much more far afield. You'll find people in every possible field that actually spend a certain percentage of their daily life, either for hobby or more commonly for work, doing some programming thing that, and nevertheless, their title is not programmer, and so nobody counts them as a programmer. So we have some of that data. Some of the kind of high-level things. Everybody likes to ask me about what programming language is hot, and it's JavaScript. JavaScript is just becoming sort of a default, almost a lingua franca. The most popular, fastest growing framework right now is Angular. I don't know if it's good or bad. It's just popular and fast growing. It's going to be something else next year. So that's a little bit more of the mode, a la mode, whatever the trend of the day. I don't know how useful this information really is. Data science and machine learning are all very popular, and I think the main reason that they're popular is that they require a level of mathematics sophistication which is not easy to find. And it takes a couple of years of actually working in the field before you get any good at it. And so the people, unlike JavaScript, which any programmer will teach themselves in 3 weeks and then be able to claim that they're pretty good at JavaScript and it'll be true, with machine learning, with data sciences, it's just much harder to get a grasp on the field and to be able to learn how to do it. So, and it's also a very trendy thing now. Everybody wants to hire a data scientist to mine their data. And so there's a very big supply and demand imbalance with people that are in data science. I feel like hiring a data science today is sort of like buying an avocado in the off season at the Tesco, which is that there's only 4 there. They're 6 pounds. 3 of them are hard and 1 of them is rotten. So you can buy an avocado technically, but they're very, very overpriced and very, very frustrating experience in terms of what you actually take home. And that's what it feels like to hire a data scientist right now. Our solution to that in-house, we don't have problems hiring programmers at all because Stack Overflow is, every programmer has heard of us. We're like the hub. But when we tried to hire a data scientist, it just didn't work. And so at some point I said, we're going to start training our in-house programmers to be data scientists at the same time. And maybe 3-4 years from now, we'll actually have 1 data scientist. And I think that's the point we've gotten to now. 3-4 years later, we now have a couple of data scientists that we trained.
Scott, a quick one, I think. We're just about to run out of time. Very, very quick question.
Hi, Joel. I wonder if what you might suggest to encourage young people to pick up coding. I'm a project manager and moving into data science for the last 3 years.
Yeah.
And I help a charity, and I've come across Coder Dojo, everyone, give them your money from Ireland. And they're encouraging 6 to 11-year-olds to learn to code, run by volunteers and completely done, and plug for Salesforce, who just gave them $200,000 in London 4 weeks ago. How can we encourage the young to pick up code, which I think is the new reading, writing, math of our age?
It might be the reading, writing, math of our age. It might also be like a mechanical skill that you don't need to know how a car engine works to drive a car, but nevertheless, everybody drives cars, and it's an incredibly valuable skill. I think that one part of it that I think people sort of dismiss is just how much better a career in coding is than all the other careers that people are recommending. And it's not going to be politically correct to say this, but oh my God, have you seen how hard it is to be a nurse? Like, this is a career that lots of people are very excited about, and it pays very poorly, and it's unbelievably miserable. And you work shifts, and you have to clean people up, and it's just awful. And I'm a great fan of everybody being a nurse. That's wonderful that people want to go into that and they want to help other people. But seriously, coding is so much better than that. It pays so much more. It's so much cleaner, so many fewer night shifts. It's just the number of people that are not even realizing essentially what the implications are of their career choices that they're making early on. And so we have this crazy imbalance where everybody wants to either work getting coffee for a movie director, or the careers that are sort of considered appealing to youth today sometimes are not really appealing careers. There's sort of too much competition. Everybody wants to be a social worker, but we have enough social workers. We really do. It's a fantastic career, but it's sort of more people want to do that than want to do the things that right now are building the future and creating a great world. So, a part of it may just be, help kids these days understand just what a daily day-to-day life looks like as a computer programmer, and how that compares. I actually think I think everybody should learn coding like math. I'm all for that. I do actually think, though, that there are a limited number of people that actually find it to be a delightful intellectual activity, and those people should be sort of especially encouraged and certainly not stomped on. But if they don't find it enjoyable, it's just like I don't find, football enjoyable. So it's you could have forced me to do football all throughout my education, and I still would have quit the minute you allowed it. I was forced to take piano lessons for a couple of years, and the minute it became optional, I'd never touched another keyboard, the piano type. So I really do think that people either are delighted by programming or they hate it. And if they're delighted, we just have to not stomp it out of them.
Joel, I've just got a quick one. We've only got a minute or two left.
Sure.
Yeah, because I've got a whole load of questions, and there's one final one I wanted to ask you before we all say goodbye. But there's a debate going on about whether you build or buy, and it's been an ongoing debate from the start of programming.
Build versus buy, yeah.
Build versus buy.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I have a very good answer. I think that every company, every firm should look at where their competitive advantage lies, and they know what that is. And they should build all the things along the axis of their competitive advantage and buy everything else. It's just very, very, very simple. If you're a bank, then very little of your competitive advantage has to do with your ability to serve files, to a network, with a network file server. So go buy that. Don't have a team of developers in-house building your own file sharing system. On the other hand, as a bank, you may make money if you can price a derivative faster, or if you can find market arbitrage conditions faster. So by all means, build that. That's where you're getting your competitive advantage. And I can think of, everybody in every line of business can think of that. You should be building all the stuff that is your core mission that gives you competitive advantage over your competitors. And you should be buying everything in context that essentially allows you to be in business, but doesn't necessarily give you competitive advantage. You could have the world's best human resources software, and at the end of the day, it's not going to make any difference to the bottom line.
Well, Joel, thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening.